Hi, I'm Carmen Medina, and welcome to Agile Uprising Podcast.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising Podcast. I'm this week's host, Jay Hersko, and the topic of this week is the future of Agile. We're almost 20 years out from Snowbird, 20 years in. We're seeing Agile in the enterprise. We're seeing Agile in non-IT spaces. So what we wanted to do this week is to gather some of our actual coalition contributors to round the table conversation around where we think things are going. We're going to do some speculation. We're going to cover a couple of various topics. We'll talk methodologies. We'll talk frameworks. We'll talk coaching, product owners, all that fun stuff. So joining me today, I have two very special guests. First, joining us from across the pond in London proper, we've already established, Georgina Hughes. Georgie, thank you for taking the time.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And we also have a repeat guest, I think one of our first or second repeat guests, Miss Johanna Rothman.
Hello, it's so nice to be here.
Nice to have you both. So I'm going to give a quick chance for you both to give bios before we dig in. Georgie, I'm going to have you go first. For the listeners that may or may not be familiar with you, you want to give a quick background, not a CV, but how you ended up speaking to us today.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an Agile coach in London, and I actually found Agile Coalition because someone linked to my blog, and I started getting this referral from the Agile Coalition, and I was like, oh, what's that about? And I went and I joined up, and it's a fantastic community, and I love being part of it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And Johanna, quick blurb.
So I'm anyone who's read any of my stuff on the coalition knows I tend to take a little bit of a contrarian view. I've been in the field for 40 years and I'm still enjoying it. And I write a lot of books. We'll just leave it at that.
That's actually an understatement. So thank you both. Thank you both. So let's start off the conversation with, like I said, we're almost 20 years in from Snowbird. I don't think that if we asked all the manifesto signers, anybody would have thought we would have gotten this far with the enterprise adoption, Agile outside of IT. Things have really gone up and gone out. And we actually, David just joined in with us. I see him in his video. So David, if you could, want to give the listeners a quick update, just give a blurb about yourself, a little bit of history, and how you ended up with us.
Well, hello. I'm a Scrum trainer, Agile coach, and how I ended up with you. Well, actually, I met Ryan Lockhart a while ago and learned of Agile Uprising through them. So I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, David. So like I said, we'll kick it off and get going. So we're 20 years in. We've got a long ways ahead of us. It doesn't look like the momentum is dying anywhere soon. So the first topic I want to start picking off is the topic of the approach, right? So the approach of Scrum, the approach of Kanban. Some of these have stayed true to their roots. Others have taken some weird sort of different flavors as they've gotten out into the ecosystem. So I want to go around the horn, and I'm going to start with you, Johanna, the contrarian. And what are your thoughts on where we are, and where do you think things are going in regards to, I guess this can almost be considered the team level approach. So where do you think teams are going to take this, and are we ripe for change? Are we ripe for disruption, or is it going to be more of the same?
So I've been getting a bunch of calls, right? I'm a consultant. Nobody calls me when things are going well. Just to lay it out there. And a lot of these organizations are attempting to do Scrum, but they don't have a co-located cross-functional team. The team or various groups of people work on multiple projects and support at the same time. So they're trying to use an approach. They could use iterations or time boxes. That's a way of managing all the work in progress. But they're trying to use a very prescriptive approach, which I actually like for cross-functional co-located teams who only work on one project or maybe even one project and support. But they're trying to use something that does not fit. And I think that a lot of people are stuck in, well, we must adopt a particular capital M methodology. And when and I, I am a veteran of the quality wars back in the 70s and back in the 80s and the 90s. And anytime anyone wants to adopt a capital M methodology, I go back and think of the big honkin' binders that I used to see. And first of all, they never worked. And secondly, everybody's context is different. So why would you try and use something that might not fit your context? And the problem I see is that too few people actually understand what is Kanban. Why do time boxes create a forcing function to limit the work in progress? Why do work in progress limits also create a forcing function? And how do we get successful projects that fit our context? So I am, I'm not happy with the state of Agile right now. As far as I can tell, everybody says they're doing some form of Agile. Too few people realize there's so many more approaches than Scrum, which is a great project management framework, but is not for everybody. And too few people actually understand the reasoning behind everything that is in Scrum. Okay, now I've ran.
Right. There's the people are losing the forest for the trees, and I would definitely agree with that one. Georgie, I'm going to swing it to you. What do you think? Where are we headed?
I think we need to start talking more to management layers and explaining that it's not just something that's for the teams, it's also something that is for them. A lot of the managers that I work with, they want to go to Agile because they've heard all the great stuff, twice as much half the time. And they don't really understand that it's not just a process, it's actually a cultural shift they're going to have to make. And that as the leaders in the organization, it's them who's got to change first rather than the teams. And they don't have that understanding that it's actually a separate paradigm that they're moving to. It's not just we can use some different words and bring in a new process. Much like Johanna says, we find that the teams are so broadly distributed, and QA is in a different continent, so you can't really talk with them, and then your client is in a third continent. So I think we need to start looking more around how we're going to shift the organizational structure in order to accommodate Agile behavior.
Yeah, the middle manager, and we'll touch on this a little bit later. The middle manager, the frozen middle, right? The middle mud. That's a huge part of these adoptions transformations, and it might be the cornerstone, the keystone that we have to crack. But it's great that you bring that one up, David. I'm going to go to you. What do you think? Where are we headed?
Where are we headed? I think we're headed to great futures. And the reason I say that is I think there's new awareness of the complexity of product development, the complexity related to knowledge work. I think people are starting to really pay attention to teams as performance units. There's a lot of experience now. People, generally young people coming into the work environment, coming out of universities, not right away, but soon, hopefully, as they enter the workforce, they're experiencing work in digital agencies or digital software firms, and therefore experiencing cross-functional teams. I think there's just much more awareness now of the usefulness of small team units. And hopefully we're moving away generally from the paradigm of shared services and project delivery toward product development and teams as the performance unit.
And I like that you brought up product development and teams, because that's one of the topics I want to get to, the role of the product owner / product manager, business interaction and how they fit into the greater Agile adoption, because I think that's another place that we see a constant crack. But I would like to take a little bit of an aside and go back to something Johanna brought up early, which is the distributed/remote team idea. And I'm going to swing it back to you, David. Do we think that, or do you think that we're going to see companies try and get towards more of a co-located approach, or is it going to be one of those things where it is what it is and we're going to be stuck figuring out how to work better remotely?
Yeah, I've been using a new term. I might be the only one using it. I would love if people started using the word dislocated instead of distributed, because we've actually seen many large organizations work very successfully with what I call distributed teams, and that is teams, whole cross-functional self-organizing teams in their own geographic areas. Great examples include companies like Amazon, of course, huge, Facebook, of course. They have teams all over the world, but they treat them as team units. A dislocated group of people are I think, what many people unfortunately suffer, and that is that they live in or work in different geographies, but they're expected by their organization to coordinate a whole bunch of work together across oceans and time zones. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to continue seeing that because there's still a sort of a management pattern toward globalization, or at least that's what they think. And lots of fallacy remains regarding the cost effectiveness of dislocated team units. But that's going to be a hard struggle. And I'd love to hear the perspective of others in the call today, but that's going to be a struggle, and it'll continue to be one.
Now I'm going to swing. Now I'm going to go to Georgie, because Georgie is the one of us who is legitimately on an island, literally. Georgie, what do you see? What do you think? Is that how is the industry going to go in regard to? I do like that term, dislocated teams.
Yeah, it's a great term. So my current client has a really political situation happening, where decade ago they separated out their QA into a completely different unit of their business and offshored them. So they are really struggling now to bring that testing back into an actual team. But from the team perspective, I think here in London, we're quite lucky. Everybody wants to come in, or everybody is living so far apart that they're already distributed teams. And I think the problems occur when you have some people who are in a base of an office and other people who are located or home workers. And I think if you've got your whole team that are either co-located in one space or separated out in different spaces, it works really well. I think where you start to get the whole problem is when you've got some co-located and some not. So I think we need to kind of make this decision of whether we can actually do something where some are co-located and not, and what that looks like, and what the social etiquette will be around those.
Johanna, your thoughts?
So I don't think it's a matter of dislocated. I think it's a matter of how many hours of overlap does the team have. My experience, so I live in the northeast part of the country, in the Boston area, and we have snow every year, and sometimes people have to stay home from work. And if the organization thinks that the work can only happen at work, they don't get anything done on the days where we have a lot of snow. And so that's one of the pieces of how managers create the culture that either does or does not work for a distributed or dispersed team. It's actually easier, David, if everybody is dispersed, if nobody is in the office. And Georgina, to your point about having people in, especially outsourced testers, that's just so silly. Yeah, don't get me started on that. That's a function of, well, it's a function of management thinking and resource efficiency. I think, David, you said it was about the teams ability to finish things. Maybe Georgina, you said that. Maybe you both said that. I don't remember. But managers have to start thinking about the team's ability. And that means that if you have too few hours of overlap, you can do something. It won't be an agile approach, and it might not even be useful. And you won't save money. But if you think of software development or any kind of knowledge work as factory work, and then you think you can have handoffs. That's the idea of resource efficiency. And if people would manage to just transition their thinking, especially middle managers and senior managers, to flow efficiency, they would actually see a whole lot of benefit. So you can have a program with people all over the world as long as those people are in co-located teams. But once you have bits and pieces of people, it doesn't work if they're in the same building, and it doesn't work if they're around the world.
You know, you bring up a good point before I move us along to the next topic, Johanna, where you say, if it doesn't work when they're in the same building, it doesn't work around the world. And I think that's a crux issue that a lot of management leadership, even team members, don't understand. If you can't get it to work local, it's not going to work distributed, dislocated, remotely. I'm currently at a company where the whole team that I'm on, I only have one other person in my office who is on my team. And I'm out of the Philadelphia metro area, but we have people in Tampa, Florida. We have people up in Connecticut. We have people in Minneapolis, people in Boulder, Colorado. And one of the things that helped us work is we do spend a fair amount of time. Once a month, we'll travel in. Once every couple of weeks, we'll travel somewhere neutral, and we'll spend some time working together. And because and I know this sounds hokey, because we've developed that trust with each other and we're comfortable with how each other works, it makes it easier to distribute because we have that bond, that shared understanding, where you're right. But to your point, Johanna, if we couldn't get it work in the office, it'd be all for naught anyway. It'd be just craziness. So I want to switch topics, and I want to start going into roles. However, I do want to make a call back. Johanna, you had a comment of the big honkin' binders. The company I currently work at has tons of those floating around still, of dubious lineage, to the point where it's become a bit of a running joke. So if someone is having a rough time with one of their programs, someone will leave a binder that'll say like project management for project managers, and it's from like 1994. We'll be leaving it on each other's desk with a post-it that says, hey, maybe you could use this. Maybe this will help. So they've run into almost a gag joke running around the office. It's rather amusing. So moving along, let's go into roles. So the role of the Scrum Master, the role of the team lead, team member, the role of the product owner. Where do we think those things are going in relation to how they were started and where they are now? Georgie, I'm going to start with you. Where do you think, I know it's a big question, there's multiple roles on Agile team, but where do you think this is where are we going? Where's this taking us? What changes can we see coming?
So what I would really like to see is, instead of having software development teams, we just have business teams. So instead of having, say, your sales team in one room and then your development team creating their software, I'd like to see those developers actually being part of that team, so that they're in there seeing how the work happens, being part of it, and so they can then build software together. So the team isn't any longer a development team. It's the sales team that happens to have some people who do software development. And then you'd still have the Scrum Master, but maybe it would be more, and your product owner would be the head of that sales team, just for instance. So that we get away from this concept that software development has to be its own department. A friend of mine uses an example that back in the 1900s, we had electricity departments, and they would just be the people who would look after the electricity. But you just don't have that anymore. It would be madness, because everybody uses it and we all expect it to be consistent and work and invisible. So I hope that the same is going to happen with software development, that software development teams go away and you just have teams that happen to make some software as part of their role.
It's more of a, right, the false dichotomy between the business and IT, right? And slowly but surely those two, that Venn diagram is becoming one. But you're right, it almost becomes, we want to start thinking in terms of solution delivery instead of software delivery, right? That's where we really want to get to.
Yeah, absolutely.
David, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a really tough question. I agree that the lines between business areas of an organization and other areas like software development will continue to blend. At least I hope that happens. I do think that, at least in the Eastern Middle Canada region that I work in, there seems to be a real awareness and appreciation for the role, not necessarily the role of Scrum Master, but a facilitator. I think organizations here are experiencing real benefit by having facilitators, maybe just to improve the way meetings occur, but I think also as cultural compasses and various other fringe benefits. There's also certainly a move toward product thinking, or sort of rearranging staff around value streams and product lines. That's happening in the enterprises here in the Toronto area for sure. So that, I think, raises awareness or importance of, not necessarily, they don't call it product owner per se, but I think that perspective is being valued and showing benefit. So I think in terms of roles, we'll continue to see move toward product development with a blend of business and delivery staff, and there will be roles for facilitators, whether they're called Scrum Masters or Agile coaches or just facilitators. I'm not sure.
Johanna? Finish. Go on, David.
I'd like to just add, to the technical delivery of product, like the role definitions around that. I don't have a handle on that as well as I do the others, because the prominence of and the growth of this interest in DevOps and such is leading to all kinds of new roles, it seems, and I'm not sure how that's going to play out.
Good call. Johanna, what are your thoughts?
So in my experience, I find that many teams need a little bit of facilitation so that they stay on track, that they know what the track is, they stay on track. I don't know if the product owner is the right role. I am sure that we have way too many coaches at the team level. I don't think we need nearly the number of Scrum Masters that we have, because I see these Scrum Masters as leading the team as opposed to enabling the team. So, Scrum wrong? Of course they are, but they're also giving Scrum Masters a bad name. So I don't see a need for all three roles: a product owner, a coach, and a Scrum Master. I think that that's crazy. On the other hand, I do think, teams need to know what their backlog is. And Georgina, with all due respect, I have yet to see an integrated approach for almost anything in an organization. So I don't see how to get to that real product thinking, especially if you're making a mass market product. I don't see how. I might be too limited in my perspective. And I am a huge fan of cross-functional teams and teams visiting their customers or bringing customers in. I don't see quite how to get to where you're thinking, but that's okay. I can think about it some more. And I don't think that we need a product organization as much as we need everybody to move in the same direction. Do we know what our products and services are? That's a function of our strategy. And are we learning together as management teams, as product value teams, as as delivery teams. And if we are learning together, we can probably overcome almost anything, regardless of the roles, of the named roles that we have.
So I will say that I think that the role of, I know we call it product, program, what have you, the alignment against a value stream or a stakeholder in a company. I like those ideas. My current place, my current location, I'm actually seeing that start to come to fruition. I honestly think, to Georgie's point about getting to more of a delivery team, not business and IT. I had an intern who worked for me who's now a full-time junior employee. Shout out to Jake. He dropped a nugget of knowledge this week. He said, I don't get it, because IT and the business were all paid from the same tree. Mm-hmm. And I thought I said, Jake, first of all, it's pretty good that you picked that up so young in your career, but he's right. So that almost false dichotomy of the business versus the IT versus the technology solutions delivery people. I think that's one of the almost linchpins when it comes to enabling true agility and growth and business development, regardless of roles. I think it's getting away from that split and say, hey, we are all on the same team. And we all are marching towards the same goal. But like you said, Johanna, if there's no shared vision, well, then you're basically taking a shotgun approach to success. It's not necessarily going to be successful. So David actually provided me with a great segue, and I think he did this unintentionally, but if he did it intentionally, I will give you props. DevOps, DevSecOps, technical practices. And because you've provided the segue, David, I'm going to go back to you. Where are we going with this? It almost seems, my personal opinion, it almost seems like we had an entire cottage industry spin up around Scrum and Agile. We had an entire cottage industry spin up around coaching and frameworks, which we'll get to in a moment. And yet still there are teams that are struggling with the whole concept of just test-driven development. Where are we going, David?
Well, I think we're going to a good place, but not fast enough. And what I mean is, I know of universities and colleges that are embedding test-driven development and some of the agile engineering practices that come out of the XP history into their curricula. I don't think that it plays a strong enough part yet in education, but I'm optimistic, let's say. In terms of the workplace or the world of work, gosh, so the CEO of Scotiabank, which is one of Canada's largest banks, he said about a year and a half ago, he said that our bank is a technology company, and it just so happens we're in the business of banking. That's not his exact quote, but I think that sentiment is being understood in many enterprises, that the role of their technology and the strength of their software will define their sustainability. So that also makes me optimistic that people are paying real attention to the technical practices that produce high quality or that help us to produce high quality. That makes me optimistic. I just wish that we would get there faster. I wish that we would have a stronger education around these practices. The good news, that maybe the saving grace, is that we have access to, and increasingly we have access to great tools, and fantastic software tools are being developed quickly and routinely and cheaply these days. So more people have access to tools that enable things like continuous delivery, and that makes me optimistic.
Johanna, I'm going to swing it to you. What do you think? Technical practices.
So my opinion about technical practices is that if managers realized that technical excellence allowed for speed, they would actually make technical practices their goal. My understanding, my experience is that managers do not realize that just as management excellence is required for the management parts and responsibility to the business, they don't realize the role of technical excellence. And I mean, I see this in my little product development. The reason I can write so fast is because I write. You might not agree with my with what I write, but you can understand it. I have trained myself to write in that way. In the same way, back when I was a developer, I tried to do, I did not do test-driven development. I was not that smart, but I tried to incorporate automated unit tests for every single thing I did back in my very first job. I'm not sure why people don't think that's part of their job. I mean, TDD makes automated unit tests so much easier. And I was also a tester. It never occurred to me to do any manual testing because a computer was much better at testing than I was. Did I have to do some manual work at the end? Of course, but not as a matter of here's how I'm going to test the product. And so many managers do not realize the role of test automation throughout the entire life cycle. And if they did, and also not just code mobbing, so that people understand what's going on in the code and tests. The first time I paired it was 1982. It was a horrible experience. I was kicking and screaming almost the whole time, but we had a superior product. And then the first time I mobbed, I think was only about 4 or 5 years ago. And again, I learned the product. I understood how to write the code and written code for many, many years. So if I understood that after just a half a day of mobbing, that's so technical excellence is part of how we produce products. Technical excellence is how we integrate people. I don't talk about onboarding anymore. I think that's a horrible thing. Um, and and technical excellence can excellence because then people have an integrated idea of what the product really is. But if managers don't understand technical excellence is how we actually get to speed, it's never going to happen.
That's a great point. Georgie, I'm swinging to you.
Yeah, so I agree with both David and Johanna. I was quite lucky when I went to uni. I did a computer science degree. So we did everything from chip architecture to UI design, everything in between. Apart from testing, I was never given any formal education around what the expectations were of either a tester testing or a software developer testing. But a lot of the junior devs that I work with these days, they've either done pure software engineering, so they don't really have that view of a development pipeline from idea to out in life, because they don't really have any view of software, server-side architecture and like networking and IP, the whole stack. And I'm working with one woman who's got a joint honours degree, so even her software development skill is quite low considering she's fresh out of uni. Now, they're willing to learn and they're doing it, but that's going to take them time. And when you hear the likes of Uncle Bob saying that about half of developers that are writing production code have less than 5 years experience doing software development, I wonder if people are ever actually being allowed to get to that point where they're truly expert in the software development field. And I think we're going to need to start looking at ways to move to non-hierarchical based promotions for developers. I've seen a lot of really good software developers move off of a team because they need extra income to support their growing family. They turn 30, they start to get a mortgage and have kids. And in London, that's an incredibly expensive thing to do, but it's expensive regardless where you are. And so people are having to go up the hierarchy and leave the actual development work behind, just at their point where they're probably gaining intermediate level skills. And if we don't start to value, much like Johanna was saying, if we don't start to value that development is a highly technical and worthwhile skill set, and find ways of encouraging people to stay in the technical side of work, then we're going to be in real trouble, I think.
You know, you bring up a good point, because I've worked in 3 companies where they have where it's assumed, or historically it's always been, you talk about, Georgia, you talk about advancement inside the corporate culture. It's assumed that when you get to a certain point, you should be a manager, because that's how you're progressing. And I then now need to manage people. I need to manage teams, and then a division, and then an organization, where if I went to school to write code, and that's where my true passion lies, and you're telling me that now I got to turn around and manage people, which is not something I maybe even took courses for. You know, you're putting the square peg in the round hole. I think you're onto something, and I know you cheated because you have a psychology background. It's you know, you've set people up with false expectations, and now you're basically creating problems inside an organization out of whole cloth by trying to put the round peg into that square hole.
Yeah, I've yet to see many developers, I was about to say any, but I have seen 1 or 2. I've yet to see many developers who really go into line management and start being excellent line managers. All they talk about is how sad they are they're not coding anymore, that they couldn't stay there because it's not enough for what they want to do outside of work.
Right. And that's a whole nother conversation and a whole nother episode. We'll have to have you back on with David, and we'll line up Ryan Lockhart and some tech guys, and we'll start talking about career advancement in the engineering space. Georgia, I'm going to stay with you because, again, I just introduced that you do have a background in psychology. Let's talk about Agile coaching. And I know Joanna's going to have a lot to say about this one, because her and I have gone back and forth about this. Where do you think the role, the discipline of and I'm doing gratuitous air quotes here, the Agile coach, where is that going?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I even though I introduced myself as an Agile coach, I don't like the term. I think it's considered, much like I just said about the developers go promoted into management, I think we have the same problem in the Scrum Master community, where we then push people into Agile coaches because they want the kudos of the extra skills that they've got. They want the extra income. So I think we need to actually pull back that Agile coach role a little bit and start thinking about how we do coaching and facilitation on teams at different levels. So I've been in organizations where every team, the management have insisted every team must have a Scrum Master or a coach or some kind of facilitator available to them at all times. And then you say, okay, but where's your coach for your team? And they're like, no, we're fine. We don't need a coach. So I think we need to start looking more into every layer, every step. Any kind of team needs that kind of support, especially when you're doing knowledge work. You need some help to be introspective and have reflections upon yourself. And I would also like to see more people in the Scrum Master and Agile community space actually going and having proper facilitation training, proper coaching training, so that they understand the psychology behind it and how to make better use of people's time, so that you get a high return on investment in your meetings, so that people have support networks to help them progress and grow in their career.
Joanna, what do you think?
So I agree with a bunch of what Georgie said. I actually think that if we stopped trying to intersect and interject whatever it is we're doing at the team level and only focus on management, we would see the cultural change to really make Agile organizations. I've written and been speaking about Agile management for a long time. Managers create and hold the culture of the organization. They refine that. But if they think that Agile approaches are something a team can do and only a team, that's just craziness. I don't understand. Okay, back when I was a young developer, my manager mentored me. My colleagues coached me. I had a lot of technical expertise available to me from my first line manager and from my colleagues. And we were not really a cross-functional team. We're a team of, I don't know, a couple hundred developers working on a telephone switch for the Department of Defense. For a variety of reasons, everything was siloed. And still, we made a lot of progress. And back when I moved to a commercial company a year and a half later, 4 or 5 colleagues I could ask questions of. And we had an agreement. How many minutes would we stay stuck? And first I thought, oh, I can be stuck for half a day. And this is before the internet, where you could actually search and find answers. And my manager said to me, why would you be stuck for half a day when you can get help in 15 minutes? I thought, oh, yeah, that's a much idea. So I don't understand why, and I think that this goes back to the flow efficiency versus resource efficiency thinking. Are managers of technical teams incapable of mentoring and coaching the people who they serve? It's possible. Do managers even realize that that is part of their job? And I actually think that if we had agile coaches for managers and find out what the managers are doing all day, running from meeting to meeting, where they don't have time to think, where they are multitasking, where their decision times take so long. I mean, think about the value stream for a team. It almost always reflects the value stream for their managers. And if their managers have very long decision times, the team will have a very long value stream, or I should say maybe the teams. So there's a bunch of interplay here, and it means I need to finish writing some of these books I have in progress.
But you make a good point, Johanna, when you say a manager who has a long decision time it gets represented in the delivery time of the actual team. That's spot on, right? Because if you have to get 6 different people to sign off on something, it just takes that much longer. It shows that there's something rotten in Denmark, and there is a process problem that you really need to look into, because otherwise you're just going to take a month of Sundays to do anything. Yep. David, you back?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, the wonders of the internet. So what are your thoughts? Agile coaches, where are we going? What are we doing with it?
Well, I don't want to disparage any of the work that some really great Agile coaches do and have done, but I would love to see the term expire. I think maybe the term came into existence as people that were maybe formerly Scrum Masters or just great facilitators and programmer coaches were seeking a climb up the ladder, back to what Georgina was saying earlier, that technical staff sometimes find themselves in a management role just to support their families with a higher salary. And maybe that's where the Agile coach term has come from. But I also really agree with what Joanna and Georgina have said, that true skills as facilitator, true skills as coaches are really helpful and necessary in a work environment. I'm just not sure that the role of the Agile coach is that utility in our future. I'd like to see not. I'll just stop by. I'll end by saying this: that in my past and in my experience, the most impactful ways that I've been able to help teams is as Scrum Master, working directly with a team or very closely with 1 or 2 teams at a time. And as an Agile coach, I've always felt a bit of a floater, and the impact I've had on an organization as an Agile coach certainly is less direct, and in my opinion, the position as Agile coach isn't positioned well for great impact.
Well said, and I think we could spend another hour just talking about Agile coaching. I know we personally, our group kicked the hornet's nest with our dark side of coaching. Johanna and I went back and forth. Actually, on the coalition about that. I had a lot of people reach out, so I think we can. I will definitely be inviting everyone back to dig into that deeper, because I think that's something that if we address it and we put the sunlight on it, we can probably find a way to, like you said, David, expire the word and take us to a better place. Next topic, which is a personal favorite of mine because I think it's just totally crazy, frameworks and scaling inside the enterprise. So where are we going with this? Is SAFe the future? Is SAFe the past? Is it less? Is it dad? Is it something else? Is it a hybrid framework? Is it a meta framework? Where are we going to go with this? And I'm going to start with, I think, Johanna, you're going to have an opinion, so I'm going to start with you.
Oh, God, yes. Okay, so expletive deleted the frameworks. Just expletive deleted them. So I think that still is okay for this podcast.
You could have cursed. You've heard our last episodes. You could have said it. That's fine.
I try not to swear with a microphone, but everyone knows exactly what I said. So I think the frameworks may actually kill Agile. I think that the frameworks are a pox upon the universe. I see people trying to do program management with Scrum of Scrum of Scrum of Scrums of Scrums. That's not actually what any of the Scrum people think is right, but they have not read any books, not downloaded any guides. They have not taken any training. They heard about it and they decided that was it. I think SAFe is an excellent RUP. It's not agile enough for me. I mean, if you really want to change things, why would you plan for a whole quarter at a time? Well, how do you integrate the discoveries and the experiments if you do that? I don't know enough about DAD or less or any of that other stuff. My experience with it is that, first of all, people don't do it well, and then they don't even know what they're doing. I also am quite suspicious of an industry that is built upon certifications. So I hold no certifications by design. And there's a reason that goes back to the 90s for that. And yet I was at a PMI symposium last week, and people really enjoyed what I had to say regardless of the fact I have no certifications. I often speak at the big Agile conferences, and I have no certifications. I am firmly in the camp of everybody has their own context. And I don't know how your organization needs to incorporate change. If you don't need to incorporate change, don't use any framework at all. Use whatever worked for you before. But we actually have a really good approach and a name for gathering multiple teams for one business objective. Management. Yes, that is the word. Those are the words I use in my program management book, and they are still quite useful. And they apply across many, many industries and many organizations. And if you want to use an agile approach to program management, you might not even want to use my suggestions, although I offer many, many more options. But this whole business of a prescriptive framework, I think, is crazy. So there are a lot of things I don't like about, in particular, SAFe and less and all this other stuff. But I think that the real key is that if you have a given context and you understand how much change you want and need in your program or across the organization, and project portfolio management is very different from program management. Project portfolio management is about optimizing for the strategy of the organization. Program management is about optimizing for this particular product delivery, right? So they're two different beasts. I should stop there. Okay. Think about, the net is think about your context, think about how much change you need to encourage and accommodate, and then decide if a framework, which I think is an expletive deleted framework, is the right approach for you. My experience, almost never.
I think I need to trademark expletive deleted framework. So when I write my own framework, that's what I'm going to call it. I'll make sure I give you royalties, Johanna.
Thank you.
Georgie, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I absolutely agree with Johanna. So most verbs are in English are directional. One thing we miss when we say scaling frameworks is whether they're up or down. And I think most people make the assumption that we're talking about scaling up because they still think in terms of hierarchies. I was listening to one of Tobias Mayer's video casts recently, and he was talking about it should be scaling down. You need to reduce the amount of people you have within the organization, because the more people you have, the more friction you have, and it becomes a barrier to agility. If teams are really self-organizing and self-managing, then how many layers of a hierarchy do you really need? If they've got direct contact to their customers, if they're collaborating well, they are likely to not need all these middle managers that we've put in from we needed people to be the commander, to do the command and control work. And I think it's just part of the hang up of that. And I think that people are all trying to productize Agile. When it's a culture, it's an idea in the way that Agile is, it's really hard to make money around that unless you create a product. And I think a lot of these things, in particular SAFe, are really just people trying to monetize in some way. And if you go to an organization and say, look at my fabulous scaling framework I've got here. You can buy this from me. I can train everybody in your organization, and then you'll have the superpowers that are Agile. Well, that's a great way of making some money.
You hit on another touch point, which is the whole shirts and certs and the monetary part of it. Again, that's a 4-hour podcast because we have people who would love to come on and go about that. Thank you, Georgie. David, what are your thoughts?
Okay, I really agree with what Joanna and Georgina have said. It's going to sound like I disagree, however, by saying this. I think frameworks can be useful. And for example, that is how Miles Davis could get into a recording studio with John Coltrane and Mr. Evans on the drums and just say, hey, this is a blues in B flat with a focus on this particular mode. And out of that statement, they understood the form, they understood what would be appropriate or inappropriate if they were to improvise within that framework. And the result, of course, is one of the greatest recordings of all time. And so frameworks can be useful. I even don't complain much about the big, heavy prescriptive frameworks like SAFe and stuff, because I treat them as hypotheses. There's not a lot of evidence that they actually work, so I won't call them a solid theory. But and I don't think that we should not look at and learn about those hypotheses. I think we can derive some useful ideas. But to treat them as prescriptions is really dangerous, and to treat them as anything other than hypothesis is really dangerous. I work closely with an organization here in Toronto. They are currently uninstalling Kanban and installing the Spotify model. That's the...
I'm sorry.
I know, it's crazy because like what they forget is that Spotify didn't start with the Spotify model. And so, and they also forget that, again, those are just hypotheses. I do think that people, if they're stuck in one particular way of working or they're comfortable with a status quo in their current work environment, people need to see other ideas. They need enough, what I'll call disconfirming information, so that they will leave the status quo that they currently are comfortable in and go into a scary unknown. And so if these hypotheses like Kanban from the LKU or like SAFe or like LESS, if these hypotheses help to disconfirm someone's current status quo, then they can be useful.
I think I would agree in a rare instance of us blindly pimping our own wares, we are going to be doing a series coming up on the scaling frameworks, because I think I share opinions. I share the opinions of all three of you. I think, David, I'm probably closest to you, where in the sense that before we started recording, we had our video on, and I was looking and commenting around all the books behind Johanna, and then Georgie was showing all of her bookshelves in the house. And I almost look at these frameworks, these methodologies, approaches like books, in the sense that each one has its own piece of knowledge. And to really be successful, maybe you want to pull bits and pieces out of each as influence to say, well, to combine those in a blender and use that to drive your enterprise, your organization, your team to where you want to go. It's almost like a recipe, right? Where if I steal from 3 different recipe books, different recipes from here and there, combine them all and then pick out the best parts, I'll be guaranteed a good meal. Which if my wife was here, she'd start laughing because I'm a horrendous cook. That's almost how I look at it. I think I look at it like you, David, where it really is just influence and a potential solution. So bounce them all against each other, and maybe you come across something that works for you. There's the whole agilist is pragmatist conversation that's boiling its head up. But I will close with that quote from, I think it was George Box, who said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. It's the same thing with frameworks. All of them are wrong, but some may be useful. It's all on how you apply it.
Agreed.
We're quickly coming up on time, but I want to throw one last question out there, because I thought this one was pretty interesting. In the agenda, someone threw in the quote from Steve Denning. Was it which one of you threw that one in there?
Well, that was me. I saw that recently, and I thought it might be interesting for this discussion.
Yeah, expand on this if you wouldn't mind, David.
Yeah, sure. So very simply, Steve Denning, in a recent article, I think that he published with Forbes, said that the reward for the success of Agile is the proliferation of fake Agile. And gosh, that struck me, because as Agile practices and ideas show good results, there is also likely to be the sort of the counterpoint to that, right? The copycats, or the hangers on, or the, as Georgie and Joanna have both said, the proliferation of certifications and such. So there's some fake Agile out there in the world, and that's maybe the reward for the success of Agile.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, like a copy of a copy. Okay.
Good.
Okay. Georgie, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a powerful quote, isn't it? That's thought-provoking. I think I'm going to go away and probably read the full article and tweet about it.
Well, I'm glad we could be the muse. All right. Johanna, what do you think?
So we are definitely seeing this now, right? This is even Ken and Jeff actually talk about the low percentage of Scrum adoption that's actually successful. And everything I have seen, and again, I'm a consultant, so people don't call me when things are going well, is that almost all of my clients use what they call iterations, and they use what they call stand-ups, and they have what they call product owners. And what is that? Is this from Monty Python? You are not saying, what's that quote? Maybe it's Princess Bride. You do not mean what you do not know what those words mean, or something.
Princess Bride. You keep using that word, Bride. But I do not think I do not think it means what you think it means, or something like that. Yeah.
Yes. And I hear, I go into organizations and they tell me they have the Scrum Master's feet to the fire. Well, the product owner is totally in charge of what the team does and when they deliver it. So why would the Scrum Master be involved? It's just too many managers, and especially at the executive level, think that Agile approaches are a way to deliver much more in much less time. And that's actually not what Agile is about. approach is about the ability to change what you're doing quickly because you have collaborated with a customer and you have collaborated with the team to finish something small. So now you can change and you can't achieve excellence. So if we don't somehow help people understand what agile approaches are, we will continue getting a lot of fake agile.
And I think I'm gonna wrap it up with that one. But first of all, David, Georgie, Johanna, I want to thank you very much for taking your time. I want to give everybody a chance to share any upcoming events, shout outs, please let know where people can find you. Is it Twitter? Is it LinkedIn? Any upcoming books or engagements? Johanna, I'm going to start with you because you spoke last.
Well, thank you so much. For those of you who are wondering about geographically distributed teams, my book with Mark Kilby, which, yes, we wrote as a geographically distributed team, and we pair wrote it, From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams, Collaborate to Deliver, is in its final editing. So I don't actually know when the final book will be ready. That always has to do with copy editing and integrating comments from our reviewers. But that's my my upcoming book that should be out maybe this year, probably early next year, because books always take longer than I think. And you can, well, it's true. You can find me as Johanna Rothman on Twitter and LinkedIn, and my website is jrothman.com, because I got a website back when it was fine. It was if it was your first initial and last name.
Good for you. Good for you. You're inadvertently technologically dating yourself, right?
Well, it's true. It's true. I've been writing my blog since 2003. Right? Very few people can actually say that.
That is impressive. It is impressive. Georgie, where can people find you? What do you have coming up?
Sure. So likewise, I have been writing since the early noughties, but I hope most of those blog posts have been taken down now because I was very young. So these days you can find me blogging at georginahughes.com. I'm at Agile George on Twitter. We have a lot of meetup.com agile groups in London, and I'm talking on the 5th of December at Agile Roundabout about agility in fintech. And I'm working on a workshop for Scrum event on the 6th of December with my friend Thomas. And that will be around disruption and how we work with disruptive agilists.
Awesome. Awesome. Sounds exciting. David.
Yeah, thanks. So I can be found at Twitter at Dave Sabine. I can be found at LinkedIn, which I like using, and I like corresponding there. I also have a domain, davesabine.com, which I got in the mid-90s, like the other two that we're talking with today. But you can find me next at the Gatineau, Ottawa Agile Tour conference, which is happening at the end of November in Ottawa. I'll be speaking there. I have a workshop prepared called The Art of Agile Documentation. And well, I guess I live in London, Ontario, which is really funny because Georgina lives in the real London. So like, it's funny that I'm here just south of the River Thames in Canada. But you can find me mostly around the Toronto area. That's where I work most of the time.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, on behalf of myself and the rest of my group, David, Georgina, Johanna, I want to thank the three of you. On behalf of our guests, I want to thank all of our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a review, rating, leave a comment on iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry, your podcasting app of choice. If you'd like to join the discussion, if you'd like to follow on with this episode and add some of your opinions, there will be a thread on coalition.agileuprising.com. We invite everyone to come in and get in on the conversation. And last but not least, if you do like what you hear, we do have a Patreon account. We don't get a lot on it as of late. I think it's just the 3 board members just trying to test it out. But if you are interested in helping defer hosting and production costs, you can see the show notes for more details. Until next time, this is the Agile Uprising Podcast, signing out.